Thank you so much, Reverend Sawyer. So again, my name is Laila Rogers. And we will be discussing how to be anti-racist from the perspective of arts education, along with my partners, Sarah Messenger and Brianna Bonkley. So we begin with just a special letter to you. Dear St. Mark's Church, today we are discussing a topic that impacts us all, no matter the color, background, or culture of the individual. This discussion is not designed to make anyone question their character or moral standing, but to shed light on the dangerous and criminal ideology of racism that seeks to divide us rather than bring us together. While we may be discussing racism as it relates to dance education, we hope that you can take and apply these tools to your personal and professional lives. Thank you to Reverend Ann Sawyer and Janine Otis for this opportunity and your support. A special thank you to the members of St. Mark's Church for joining us and your willingness to take part in this journey as we break the barriers that restrict us as humans, artists, and scholars. Love and respect, Laila, Brianna, and Sarah.
Okay, thank you so much, and thank you for having us again. Before we get into our topic today, we wanted to talk about some community agreements. So the first one is practice active listening. We don't want to just listen to hear. We would like you to listen to hear, to understand, and eventually to contribute. We will be having a discussion section for that. Also, acknowledge that everyone holds multiple truths. We are all here and all in this together. Everyone has their own truth and they are all valid. Also, please use only I statements when speaking on experiences that you have had personally or experiences that you have witnessed. Our next one is your words matter. Don't be afraid to speak your truth. We're going to have a discussion section like I was saying before. Please do not be afraid to speak up. This is a safe space, and oftentimes the three of us like to say that this is a brave space. So please be brave enough to speak your truth because we would love to hear it. And lastly, lean into discomfort. We're going to be talking about racism and how to be an anti-racist, and some of these topics can be uncomfortable, but we want to challenge you to lean into that discomfort, and hopefully we'll all learn something and be better for it. So we have an agenda that we like you to know. First, we're going to be talking about what is racism. Then we're going to go through some definitions of words that we'll be using throughout this entire presentation. We'll talk about power and what that means into this country, dueling consciousness. We'll also talk about some first steps to take, how to be an ally, and what are the next moves that you can take as we move forward. We'll be talking about trauma and how to cope with racism. And then lastly, we'll open it up for a discussion.
Thank you, Brianna. So what is racism? That's a really big word, and there are a lot of definitions that are being thrown around these days. Dr. Kendi offers a really great definition of racism. And then another book that's really influenced our work is White Fragility by Robin DiAngelo. And she also offers a definition, which is on the left-hand side of your screen. So as you're reading through this, what I want to point out is that both of these definitions focus on power and policy. Where they diverge is who can be racist. So for example, in White Fragility, Robin DiAngelo makes the asserts that in order to be racist, you must hold institutional power, which in this country would mean that only white people can be racist. Dr. Kendi's definition opens it to everybody. So it's very that it puts the act of racism squarely on the shoulder of the individual instead of on an entire group of people, which as we read further into the book, he warns is one of the things that begets racism, is when we ascribe an action, a thought, or a behavioral thing to an entire group of people. So right off the bat, his definition of racism is reframing our thinking of what it means to be an anti-racist. So can I have the next slide, please? So just a couple of other words that we're going to use, and we want to just kind of make sure that we all have the same working definition for today. Prejudice, white privilege, anti-racist, racial inequity, and internalized racism. And I just want to point out just a couple things. Prejudice, we hear that a lot. Prejudice could be racial or not. So for example, if I'm a ballet dancer, I could be prejudiced towards tap dancers. But prejudice can certainly be produced through racial policies and racial inequities and racial power. And then white privilege, simply that means that something wasn't made harder by the color of your skin. That's a term we hear a lot in the media today. And then anti-racist, you'll notice this is not Dr. Kendi's definition. So just again, we wanted to offer another definition from a work, from a book that's influenced our work. But what Dr. Kendi's definition is active work. It's not passive work. You have to actively be involved in changing your frame of thinking and ideology.
Sarah, I believe we lost you for a brief second at the end. Would you go ahead and start again from anti-racism, right? And
yeah, oh, I'm so sorry. Thank you so much. Yeah, so you might notice that the anti-racist definition that we offered is not Dr. Kendi's, but this is, again, another definition that's really influenced our work. So I just wanted to offer that again for thought and discussion later. But what this definition and both Dr. Kendi's definition have in common is that being anti-racist is active work. It's not passive.
thank you, Sarah. So race as a social construct, being a social construct, racism is powered by racist policies, as Dr. Kendi points out in his book in chapter 3 specifically, as he paints for us a picture of how power and racial hierarchies was started. And so we wanted to, and so that inspired me, me and Sarah and Brianna, as we were looking through the book, we wanted to see what that looked like in 21st century real numbers today. And because we're educators, so statistics and things of that nature, we wanted to show you what that looks like and the power struggles that are happening and the racist policies that are affecting the racial inequities in this country. So as we can see, just from racism is embedded in everything from education, healthcare, politics, housing options, and even to our social lives. And we, at the top of the poverty list, you see African-American children. And these also are numbers from the US Census from 2018 to 2019. So these are actual live numbers until we get 2020's numbers, and I'm sure there won't be any better. But you can see that African-American children, Black and African-American children are 31% more times, or 31% were more likely to be in poverty in 2019 and 2018. And that affects education, that then goes into effects whether they're not able to, whether or not they're able to enroll in college or not. And that even in a little foreshadowing to the book, because I couldn't help myself, but Dr. Kendi talks about how those racist policies affected his life and affected his education from the time he was in elementary school all the way up until his decision to go to college. And it had it not been for, say, another student, Dr. Kendi himself probably wouldn't have believed that he was smart enough to go to college or apply to college. And so what we are seeing in the classrooms is that this is a very heavy topic, especially as educators, because what we see in the classroom is that that's where that gap starts happening, especially with trying to get our children into higher education, past high school, out of, because we know that the more education you have, the better your chances are in life. And that goes to show just with healthcare statistics. And gonna just read the last one. Black and African-American men and women have lower life expectancies rates than whites. And that again is from the 2018-2019 census. And that's been since the start of this country, the founding of this country. And that's alarming that it hasn't changed. And so those are the racist policies and inequities that we're facing today in the 21st century, 2020. And so those are the things that we have to tackle. And that's what anti-racism is trying to do, is or what Dr. Kendi is presenting in his book is how we need to change our frame of reference, because these numbers aren't changing, and if anything, they're becoming larger. And so, again, changing our, next slide, please, changing our frame of reference. And then we wanted to go even a step further, because Black Lives Matter is a platform signaling for the, for racial equity for Black and African American people, and it also, and now it's taking in POC, people of color. But it's mainly a social justice form, and that social justice form is on the unjust laws in this country regarding around race. And Dr. Kendi, again, a little foreshadowing in his book, talks about his experiences with law enforcement and how that affected his body and how that affected how he viewed himself. And so racial policies and what racism is doing, or what racism is doing, it's not just so much as someone was upsetting me or someone said something upsetting, but it has physical effects on the body, and especially as children. And him going through that as a child, he was more afraid of what was going to happen between him and NYPD at times than he was afraid of what was going to happen between himself and classmates that he had. And again, we can see, and this is from the 2018-2019 census, more likely to be stopped for investigatory reasons, like walking down the street, things of that nature. For white men, it was 14.97%, but for Black men, 85.3% were stopped in 2018 to 2019, were stopped and checked, whether or not they, just for walking down the street. So it's like driving while Black, walking while Black. These are the numbers that when people say those things, these are the numbers that they're talking about. So it absolutely makes sense that the Black Lives Matter movement is built on undoing the damage that is done in the social justice and the in our political system.
Great, thank you, Laila. So what is this bigger picture, right? So we have a list, and you can go ahead and read them if you would like to. I would just want to break them down into sections for you. The first couple of ones we have is talking about politics. So you can see that from 96% to 100% of who is the leaders in this country are white people, and predominantly white men. If we go down a little bit further, you'll start to see in our entertainment world, those leaders in our entertainment world, from the books we read, the news, the music that we see, the films that we watch, those are being held by white people as well. Lastly, we have from our teachers and full-time college professors, 82 and 84% of those professors and teachers are white. So my question that I like to pose to you and you could just think about it, is whose voice is being brought to the table constantly, and whose voice is constantly being left out when we have all of these different positions, whether it's politics, entertainment, education, and even sports. Who is always sitting at the table and who is always left out? As we continue to go, I just want to read this quote to you, because this is why Black Lives Matter. Black Lives Matter is an ideological and political intervention in a world where Black lives are systemically and intentionally targeted for demise. It is an affirmation of Black folks' humanity, our contributions to this society, and our resilience in the face of deadly oppression. This quote comes directly from the Black Lives Matter website.
Thank you, Brianna. So how does racism manifest itself in the dance community? I'm not sure what your level of contact is with the dance community. So we just wanted to kind of go through some of the things that we see every day. And the quote on the left-hand side, I think really sums it up for us. Valuing lines over rhythm, poise over grit, and abstraction over substance. So some of the ways that we see this manifest itself in the dance community are ethnic dance forms are seen as less valuable. Things like hip hop, urban dance, break dancing, cultural dances, West African, things like that are just not seen as real technique. Professional limitations like casting for aesthetics. So for example, something that might mirror what you might see in maybe a more business or corporate structured type of world is you don't have a casting department, but you have human resources. So what are some of the aesthetics? I just encourage you to think, what are some of the aesthetics that maybe your human resources department looks for? What are some of the things that they value? What are some of the trends that you're constantly seeing that kind of mirror some of these things? So as you're reading through this list, I also wanted to offer some of the ways that the three of us have committed to combating and being anti-racist in the dance community. So one of the things that's really prevalent is body shaming. So one of the ways that we can be anti-racist with body shaming when it comes to Black and POC dancers, and really everybody, is we can teach using anatomy, because everybody has the same anatomy. And then students learn anatomy, so that's never a bad thing. Let's see, making sure that Black and POC dancers know about the opportunities that are out there for them, that are out there especially for them, the auditions, the casting opportunities. So going to find those and bringing those to my students and encouraging them to go be a part of that, things like that. Making sure that each student gets at least one correction and one compliment in class, and that could vary depending on the class size, so that there's not an inequitable distribution of only certain students are being corrected while certain students are left out. So we're not only correcting white students while Black students are being left out. So if I'm distributing my corrections, everybody gets one compliment, then we're being a little bit more democratic with how we're spending our time in the classroom. Can I have the next slide, please? So the Dueling Consciousness, this is a really big, was a really big part of the first 3 chapters in Dr. Kendi's book. And I just wanted to offer a couple paragraphs that I think really summed it up, because I thought that his words were really beautiful here. So he goes, the white body defines the American body. The white body segregates the Black body from the American body. The white body instructs the Black body to assimilate into the American body. The white body rejects the Black body assimilating into the American body, and history and consciousness duel anew. The Black body is instructed to become an American body. An American body is the white body. The Black body strives to assimilate into the American body. The American body rejects the Black body. The Black body separates from the American body. The Black body is instructed to assimilate into the American body, and history and conscious duel anew. So I can only speak from the perspective of the white dueling consciousness, but I just wanted to point out this very quickly, this idea between segregationist and assimilationist. And I think in today's world, being an outright segregationist is completely out of fashion, and that associates you with overt racism. So while people may still think that in their head, we don't see a lot of those outright segregationist policies, but we do see a lot of assimilationist policy and thinking, even still in 2020. And one of the ways I think that we've probably all seen this in action is saying an assimilationist saying might be, you're the whitest Black person I know. So you're encouraging assimilation. Or telling, Black and POC students with very high and superior intellect that they act white. Anytime you are making whiteness the default, you're encouraging assimilationism. So I just want to encourage you to kind of think about that. And are there places, if you're a white person, are there places in your life where you assume that your experience is the universal experience?
Thank you, Sarah. And so going back to what we end up coming up with in regards to racism in dance education, as you were reading over that list, you may have seen internalized racism. And internalized racism, Dr. Kendi goes over it in his book. It's the embodying of those in a Black or a person of color. It's the embodiment of those beliefs and those racist policies and ideals. And that ends up happening in the dancer's body, as in Black and POC dancers not being able to relate to their cultural movement practices, or relate to their culture at all. There's I'll speak for myself. As a dancer who grew up mainly practicing ballet and modern, I have a lot of internalized racism regarding how my body should look, how I should move, how things are working, or how I should look, and how I should feel. And for a long time, it was blocking my artistry and blocking my, my progress as a dancer. And so that's one of the reasons why I went into dance education, is because I needed to find out how to stop this from happening to other young dancers, Black dancers and dancers of color, because racism in dance doesn't not only affects Black and African Americans, but it also affects POC dancers. So we're talking about Native American, Indigenous populations, Asian Americans, the Latinx population. So what we came up with, the first steps in combating racism in your community. And so these are what we came up with in dance education, but we believe that they can be applied not only in dance education, but in your personal lives and professional lives as well. So the first one is embracing cultural relevance. 2, understanding cultural appropriation and versus cultural appreciation. And 3, committing to be anti-racist. So the first one, cultural relevance. To be culturally relevant means to embrace a way of teaching or learning that relates to the way POC and Black communities communicate, learn, and their cultural beliefs by using cultural reference to impart knowledge and skills or to relate to your peers. So cultural relevance, so that means in the way to build cultural relevance is to create cross-cultural relationships. So that means going out of your way and connecting with people that are outside of your network and learning about their cultures, learning about who you're working with, and even if it's not in a work environment, if it's just in a social environment, going out of your comfort zone to make cross-cultural connections with individuals, and building cultural relevance, because the more you learn about people, the more you learn to engage with the world around you, correct? So cultural relevance promotes growth intellectually, emotionally, socially, and politically. When we engage with others outside of our social, when we become more diverse, we begin to take the steps towards anti-racism. And that only happens with the first step, cultural relevance, which means to start building cross-cultural connections. The next one, please. Thank you. Appropriation versus appreciation. This is a big one. So to appreciate a culture means to actively seek to understand and learn about another culture, to widen perspective. And again, make cross-cultural connections. Appropriation is to take a small aspect of culture that does not belong to you for personal interest and or gain. And we see this a lot. This is one of those full embodiments of what we see in racist practice, that practice of taking from a culture and not giving reference to it, or not giving it proper due, like we saw in slides, jogging your memory back up, in ways racism is practiced in dance education, or in dance in general. Many of you have heard of Balanchine. Balanchine took a lot of his movement from Black bodies, but did not allow the Black bodies he took the movement from to perform his work, to perform their own movement. So that's a historical example of racism or cultural appropriation in dance. And so I can use another example. Sarah, Brianna, and I went to Uganda, and we went to Uganda for a study abroad trip. And in the study abroad trip, we were learning dances, movements, and everything from recipes, songs, stories, everything. And so the Ugandans told us after we completed the program that if we wanted to go back, we were able to go back and teach some of their cultural dances, because we had studied for weeks on end this movement. Now, Sarah, even Brianna, because Uganda is not any of our culture, we're American. So if we came back to this culture, and specifically, I'll use Sarah as an example, if I may. If Sarah came back to the United States specifically and went into her classrooms and began to teach Ugandan movement, without first going to Uganda or without first making that connection. And she was just putting it in her dances. She saw it on YouTube. She thought it was cute. She thought the costumes were cute. And her students have absolutely no idea where that information is coming from. That's cultural appropriation. But because Sarah, as well as Brianna and I went to Uganda and studied that information, we're now able to give it context and build on it and give the proper respect and due where it is needed. The next one. Thank you. And the last one is the simplest one. Well, let me not say the simplest one. Let me not jump to that. But committing to being anti-racist. Everyone must do their job to break down the system of racism that is embedded into the functionality of our society. Being anti-racist means to challenge white solidarity, build and support anti-racist establishments in our communities, nurture cross-cultural relationships, and commit to learning about social justice. And as Dr. Kendi points out in his book, and the reason why it was such a great precursor to white fragility is because this is something that we have to commit to every single day. And Dr. Kendi's book really opened up my eyes to committing to how I can be personally anti-racist, to not only myself, but to to my community and to becoming a better educator myself. So it's committing to being anti-racist on a constant. I'll use this example. My parents always taught me to die to flesh. And so that's what I constantly attach to this. So constantly dying to that idea of putting myself first, or putting what I believe is right, behavioral or anything, or, past interactions with one individual on top of another, a general body, and doing that for myself. And so committing to being anti-racist it's hard. It's not the easiest, like I said in the beginning, but it's a practice that has made me a lot closer to a lot more people, and it has opened up my world. And not only my world, but also the world of the students that I teach and the students that they go out in the world and are able to engage again in better ways than they would have been.
Thank you, Layla. So we all want to be better allies to Black and POC communities. So how can we do that? One of the things I want to point out on the do list that Dr. Kendi stresses over and over in the book is do be aware of your implicit biases. Have that honest conversation with yourself. For me, when I have that conversation, I like to journal and I like to write. I find that I'm very honest with myself if I just start writing and acknowledge it. It doesn't make you a bad person, but knowing that it's there can help you move forward. And again, like Layla said, that's the work of committing to being an anti-racist every day. Do the inner work and figure out the way to acknowledge how you participate in oppressive systems, and do the outer work and figure out how to change oppressive systems. So like Dr. Kendi says in his book, being an anti-racist is a very active role. So you have to figure out what do you do that continues to enable these racist policies and this racist power structure that we have. And then don't stop there. We have to keep going. What can we do in our communities and our spaces to further anti-racist policies and anti-racist thinking and ideology? Do not expect to be taught or shown. And again, this is part of that committing to being an anti-racist every day, doing the research, taking your own time. Black and POC communities have been screaming for us to listen, for white people to listen, and it is unfair to say, okay, I'm here now, show me. No, we have to put that on ourselves and in our own hearts. Do not participate in Oppression Olympics. Everybody has had a hard life, but not everybody has had a hard life because of the color of their skin. So somebody else's struggle does not take away from your own, but we need to recognize which communities are in danger right now, which communities are being brutalized, and we need to put those struggles first, and those communities are the Black and the POC communities. And then also do not assume that every member of an underinvested community feels oppressed. So again, we don't want to put behavior on all of one group. we want to keep that on the individual. So we want to make sure that we're still looking at everybody as individuals.
Thank you, Sarah. So just a couple of notes for moving forward. Do your homework and learn the history that goes for like your culture, as we do in dance and with American culture. Please do use your voice, both digitally and in person, to uplift Black and POC communities. Do advocate for your civil rights and anti-racist policies in your institutions. That could be wherever you work or in the church or wherever that may be. Do take your health seriously. We always like to say therapy is important. We all go, and we highly, highly encourage everyone to do therapy if they feel the need to do so. Do the work to create and maintain healthy cross-cultural relationships. So like Layla was saying, learn about these other cultures, invest in them, and see how you can work together to make this world a little bit better for everyone. Do advocate for others. That could be LGBTQ plus, immigration, women, education, prison reform, environment. The list goes on. Use your voice to advocate for everyone. A couple things on the do not side. Do not feel pressured to be the voice of all Black and African American people or POC. Please do not feel pressured to be a type of Black person or a type of person that has to speak up and has to do the work for everyone. Do not engage in practices of elitism or colorism, and do not become an oppressor of other marginalized groups while fighting for your own equality and freedom. Lastly, do not exploit the movement for personal gain or exposure. This one we kind of added for more younger generations. There has been a trend to exploit days like Juneteenth and Black History Month. So we want to make sure that we don't exploit the movement or even Black Lives Matter for our own personal gain or exposure.
Thank you, Bree. And finally, we want everyone to take care of themselves. A lot that's happening doesn't just, especially in the media and what's just the current state of America right now, we want everyone to make sure that they're taking care of themselves. With the heightened, everyone's stress is heightened, and especially with the dueling consciousness that Dr. Kendi talks about, it takes such a great effect on the mind and the body, both the Black body and the white body. And so these coping strategies are for everyone. Connect with family and friends and mentors to help you process thoughts and emotions. So a lot of times I myself will get on a phone call if something's happened or in the news, I see something on Facebook, and I'll get on the phone and I'll talk to somebody about it so that we can process what's happening together. Or if I, so your emotions, you get your thoughts together. That's very important. Learn to be aware and recognize the symptoms of racial trauma. So fatigue, anxiety, depression, difficulty sleeping, and developing similar coping strategies. So if you do have a Black or POC friend, loved one, family member, anybody, and you notice that they're starting to go through these traumas, so a lack of sleep, they have anxiety, they're jittery, it's slipping me, but traumas, there's constant trauma, PTSD, there's so much going on that they can't sleep at night. Check on them, make sure that they're okay. And even for yourself, make sure that you're okay. If you notice that you're engaging in those type of behaviors, engage in prayer, mindfulness, and spiritual practices. So, and that's very important. Not just this was also on our screen for when we're talking to the students as well, because a lot of times we can get so focused in our phones and what's happening in social media and what's happening around us that we can forget that we need to just practice mindfulness and sometimes just go to our space and our sacred spaces, and that's where a lot of our strength will come from. So practice, and then the next one, practice self-care by engaging in activities you enjoy and make you happy. So I love candy. So I have the biggest sweet tooth. So I actually have a drawer of candy. And so and it's almost Halloween, like I'm so excited, but that's one of the things that gives me, while I'm working on presentations and doing homework, just being able to dip into my candy jar, even if I'm getting stressed and I'm sweating and like I'm sweating now, I know that I'm going to dip into my candy jar after. So do things that make you happy. Rest if you cannot perform optimally due to racial trauma. So if something's going on in the news and you're affected by it, don't feel like you have to go out into the world. And sometimes we don't even have options, but it's okay even if you're not all there at that day, or you're just having a difficult time. Like something's not just, it doesn't have to be something that's happening in the news. It's just your life. If you're not okay, it's okay to not be okay. And recognizing those is very important. And then lastly, seek out professional help if necessary and if affordable. We understand that therapy is something that's very expensive. So that's going back to the first one is connecting with family and friends to make sure that you have at least someone to talk to. And now we're going to open the floor up. We do have discussion questions, but we just wanted to open the floor up for anybody, thoughts, questions, comments, or truths. Okay, if not, we can.
Well, I have something. Oh, wow.
Yes.
Hello.
Yes. Hello, Paul.
Yeah, my comment is that your presentation was excellent. And I'm fired up behind it. It was very, very concrete. It was excellent. I just wanted to make that comment. Okay. And thank you all. Thank you. And thank you, St. Mark's, for hosting this.
Thank you so much. Thank you for having, we're so excited to be here. Thank you. We've really appreciated it. Thank you. Well, if not, we can move to the next library and maybe we'll have one more.
Oh. Yes, I have a question. Can you tell us a little bit more about how you formed a group and how you support each other and how this came about and what you've learned from it?
Yes, of course. So we all started, the three of us actually all started randomly. We just all met. We started the program together. There's only three of us in our cohort. So we've been together just about until COVID hit. We were with each other every single day, all day, every day. And with that being that way, we started noticing certain things like in our relationships. We all knew like Brianna and I are Black and Sarah's white. And I make jokes like we're an Oreo, like, cause I'll say I love Oreo. But it took 3 years of forming that relationship. And it actually started, there was a time in class where I was being microaggressed in class about my intellect. And Sarah stepped up I didn't know how to respond at that time. And Sarah stepped up for me. And it started this conversation from behind me. I didn't realize. And then Brianna stepped in. And so, to kind of, help me, figure out what to say and stand my ground. And that's actually happened several times or several occasions where we've had professors microaggress or unintended, comment on intellect or talent or our bodies and things of that nature. And there's been times where we've had to step in for each other because we've been in dance alone. And so through those, and then putting that into our work and having conversations and then researching and trying to figure out ways that we didn't offend, or we may had inclusive classrooms when we graduated. That's what kind of started our work. And so we have papers and presentations and curriculums on how to make everyone, no matter the race, color, religion, or sexual orientation, feel welcome in the classroom, because we believe dance is for everybody. If Brianna and Sarah want to jump in, that's kind of what brought me into this. That started our relationship. We look at each other as sisters now, but it did start off as because Sarah stepped out of her she stepped out of white solidarity and stood up for me, and it was greatly appreciated, and we've been like this ever since.
And I just want to add to that, it's a relationship, like Layla said, that took a really long time to build, and it's also a relationship that we are constantly working on every single day. So we're constantly talking through things, we're constantly working through things, and we've reached this really great point where I feel like we can be completely honest with each other, without any defensiveness, and there's real thought and real reflection. And to be honest, this is the first group of friends, the first 2 friends that I've had that I've been able to do that with. And these are the 2 friendships that I value the most in this world, because of that. And so it's like Dr. Kendi says in his book, being anti-racist is an active role, and maintaining cross-cultural relationships is also an active role.
I just like to echo the praise. What a wonderful presentation, and being able to apply those concepts and those principles and those actions to dance and to your lives and your relationships together, and is just a powerful example to all of us. So thank you, all of you.
Thank you, Relevance.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Did I hear that you have questions for us as well?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Good.
Would you like me to put them up, or Layla, you're just going to read them? Or you want me to put them back up?
I would just say whatever you think is best, but it's always nice to be able to see each other when we come to talking. So whatever you think it works.
Okay. Well, I can start with the first discussion question. One of the things, because we're talking specifically really about the first 3 chapters, and one of the things that I think struck us all in the first 3 chapters were a lot of these definitions, and how some of Dr. Kendi's definitions differed from some of the popular media definitions. And we gave you one example from the book White Fragility. So we were just curious, do you feel, what do you think about those definitions? Do you agree with them? Do you disagree? Is there something missing? Is there a blend of kind of all of these? We just wanted to open that up for discussion. Do you agree or disagree with Dr. Kendi's definition of racism, anti-racist?
In certain words, like he says, like Black racism, ethnic racism. So he gives us multiple things of racism. So in those terms.
I had always kind of let me back up and complete my sentence. The original definition of racism that I had heard, like in college and all of that, was that like racism is prejudice plus power, and therefore if you are not in power, you cannot be racist. And that definition never really resonated with me, because my feeling was always that folks of color, because we were much more comfortable talking about race, were much more willing to admit when we were being racist, or like that there was no, that like just because I'm Black doesn't mean that I can't be racist toward another group, or that, and like so that definition, Kendi's definition, resonates more with how I view the world, because I think that as a person of color, because race is talked about so much more often, you're like, no, I know that I have pieces of myself that are racist, and I have to work on that. And I think that part of the thing that is challenging about the definition is that it takes basically people of color off the hook for their racist ideals as well. And it doesn't mean that their racism is worse or better than white racism or white people's racism toward other groups. But that's just like, it's on all of us to not be being racist, even if it's like our own internalized white supremacy that we're using against somebody else. So I like Kendi's definition best.
Thank you, Morgan. That was very insightful. Actually, I connected with you on a few points, because reading, I was actually like text the group like, oh my gosh, I didn't realize my behavior, and so I absolutely Absolutely agree with you. Does anybody else have anything else before we move to the next one? Okay, the next one we wanted to discuss is the dueling consciousness. Is it ever really resolved? So can someone not survive? Can someone overcome a dueling consciousness, especially in America? Or is this something that we're going to have to constantly, because Dr. Kendi says he no longer has a dueling consciousness. And I'm like, how do you, and so, well, me just starting out trying to figure out, one, how I separate, or how I have practiced assimilationist, practices in my life as a Black woman. But it gave me hope, but at the same time, I'm a little pessimist that, especially in America, can the dueling consciousness ever be resolved? So does anyone have any thoughts on that one?
Well, if it's a dueling consciousness, and if Kendi talks about a continuous process, then I don't think it can ever be resolved, but I think it can be evolved. And being a multiracial or a biracial, because I'm from quote unquote, two races as defined by white supremacists, that duality is always sort of in me. That duality of like which one am I, which one do, but it all centers into having to sort of to make it. And there was a point at which I took Undoing Racism, and I realized I can claim both parts, which was the refreshing thing about doing Undoing Racism, that I can claim both my Asian and my Black part. So, but there is still that sense in a society making us having to choose, or that "what are you" question that always comes up. So that's just my comments. Thank you, though.
Thank you.
I'm sorry. I said I apologize. We came in at 1:30 because we thought it started at 1:30. Okay.
Oh, no worries. We're glad to have you. Thank you so much for coming. I think when talking about the dueling consciousness, from a white perspective, as I got older and I really started to delve into this work of racism and racial inequity, I was honestly very shocked when I began a lot of my reflections about how much assimilation had been socialized into me, and going through that and recognizing it, starting in the dance room. What are my own implicit biases? Why do I feel that way? And then expelling them. So just from my perspective, I think the country breeds a lot of assimilationist into white socialization. And that's something that, as a white person, I think we especially definitely need to be, we need to have our antennas up.
Great. Thank you, Sarah. And just like for a wrap-up question, we just wanted to ask you, like, how are you, or how will you practice anti-racism in your life moving forward?
This group is not typically this quiet. I'll just friends.
Well, I would say that they're provocative questions to begin with, thoughtful and well-planned. And one of the practices that I can foresee is to finding people like you and activities like you've done today that open up so much understanding for me. Thank you, thank you, thank you.
And I would say, I think Undoing Racism is about facing it and recognizing it. Obviously, I'm in a multicultural relationship. I actually have an adopted African-American son, and yet but I'm from the South. the North Carolina. So I have to face my racism, which is, I would say a lot of my racism is intergenerational, and that's been really big to look at. I feel like, and sometimes I need to work on forgiving myself, but now I'm working on forgiving some of my ancestors. So it just must be faced, and you can never think, oh, I'm this progressive, gay white man living in a mixed marriage, but it still must be faced. I guess, like James Baldwin said, not everything that is faced can be fixed, but nothing can be fixed until it's faced.
Hi, Sandy. Oh, you're muted. Great.
Can you hear me? Personally, what I'm working on is calling out some of my older friends and their biases. And everyone's got an opinion about Asians this day because we keep hearing about China, China, China being the cause of our problems. So I'm calling them out, but I'm really getting into a really nasty fight over transgender people and how we can't be an anti-racism and still knock trans people because they're human beings too. And so little by little, I think with Kendi, honestly, I never thought that I might be a racist until I read Kendi. So it's made me think a lot about being quiet and not really speaking up, not wanting to burn bridges, but sometimes you have to. And so I'm pretty much aware of these things now.
Thank you. That was great. Did anyone have any? Thank you. That was actually because I feel like that's the hardest thing to do, especially when we're close to those who may at one point in time, because Kenny says you can be racist at any point in time, and then not be racist at another. So that's really challenging. So the bravery, so that you can call out your friends and your loved ones and say, this is not okay, because a lot of people don't have that courage. I know I'm currently working on that courage, even internalized racism within myself, and looking at how I view other African Americans who don't have as much education as I do. And so like elitism, colorism, and I'm a dark skinned African American woman, chocolate, I like to say chocolate, I'm chocolate. And so looking at how I view colorism and how, just for other Black women. So Kenny's brought all of that to my attention, and I'm very grateful for it, so.
I'd like to say something.
Please, Jan.
I've really, since I've been starting to read Kendi, and I've been doing that for a few weeks, I've tried to look at my life with each chapter as we go through it. I grew up in northern Minnesota. Everyone was white. And I've kind of looked at my life in different ways by trying to seek out, how is this applicable to me with my background, my family, my friends, all of those things. So I think that's been helpful to me. But sometimes it's also been very difficult to do, to sort out, how does this really apply to me, Jan Armstrong, and where I'm at today and where I live and what I'm doing and all of that. But, it's an ongoing process, of course. So, but it's certainly, it's worth doing, of course. And it's terribly important. And I just want to say, I think all of your future students are going to be so lucky and have you as such a wonderful example. So congratulations.
And well, I'm sure that none of you would be surprised for me to just acknowledge that the church has, of course, played a historical role in racism and justifying racism and enslavement throughout centuries. And while I'm proud of our Diocese of New York, I still have colleagues, and I'm sure myself that I fall short of truly living into and becoming anti-racist. I was recently, in response to a posting on Facebook that I thought it was after the court decisions regarding Breonna Taylor, I posted something in terms of holding folks accountable for the murder of Breonna. And I was astonished at a colleague who came back at me with fighting words, like, suggesting I was just, making the problem worse. And I'm like, oh, we so need to have a conversation about this. And in fact, I have had conversations with this colleague before over different topics, and it just reminds me that I can't shy away from those conversations, those difficult conversations. None of us can, and that those many of us will be and are in positions of influence and involved in policy making that affect the lives of many people. And if we want our country and for people to change, that we have to be an active role in that. So I thank you.
Another thing that I thought about too was that, like, it's to reflect on one's own experience and to try to move through the world in an anti-racist way is one thing, but to point out racism where you see it, especially as a Black woman, that's something that I'm still trying to figure out. And like, I had a situation on Friday that I was phone banking for the upcoming election. And this is like a group of progressive people, obviously, who are all trying to get somebody who's currently in office out of office. And that person made some really disparaging, and it wasn't on purpose, but they made a litany of comments basically about the folks that we were speaking to on the phone, and about how, like, I'm talking to people who are in the ghettos and they just like need our help to be able to understand the voting process. And they're just really, and that's like an incredibly racist thing to say. But number one, that's trauma for me to be hearing that from a person who's a progressive and who's like supposedly fighting for rights that all of us are going to have. But also that I didn't know I was like, is it my responsibility to call this person who's a stranger out for the thing that they said? And like that nobody else said anything, or maybe somebody did say something, but they said it in the chat, I don't know. But that, like, figuring out how I, as a Black person, navigate when other people are being racist, when it's hard to hear that you're being racist from a person who's Black. So that's something that I'm trying to navigate too, and trying to like figure out from the book, like, how do I call people out or share that they've made a mistake in a way that allows that person to then change and not feel defensive. And so there's a lot of stuff that's layered there.
Yes. Oh, thank you so much, everyone, for contributing and going on this journey with us. We are so appreciative of all of you for being here and offering us this space to have this conversation. So thank you. Just thank you one more time. Thank you.
Brianna, Layla, Sarah, thank you for that wonderful presentation and conversation. And yes, and please come back. And we wish you, I just, prior to the call, and you may have been on, we found out that Sarah is in Florida and Brianna is actually in Atlanta and Layla is here in New York. So we're able to have this conversation because we are online. But we look forward to the day when we're back in a similar place and can do this, engage in this work together and continue. So thank you.
Thank you.
And so much.